Hey, everybody. Welcome to the Soul Goals Podcast. I'm Dawn, and I'm so glad you're joining me today. This podcast is dedicated to bringing people's stories to light and hearing their journeys of inspiration and self-growth. But it's also about connection and knowing that you are not alone. Each week, I get the chance to sit down and talk with an amazing soul, someone I've had the blessing of either meeting or following in my life. I am so grateful for my guests. Their openness and their vulnerability, it is unmatched as we share heartfelt conversations together about both their challenges and their triumphs. I hope that you can grab some inspiration and connection from my guests and their stories. I know I certainly have with each conversation. What an honor to sit with these brave souls. Everyone has a story, folks. And every story matters. Hi, everybody. Welcome to another episode of The Soul Goals. My name is Dawn, and today I have the distinct honor of speaking to a good old friend of mine from the Middle Tennessee area. And I actually think I met Marcel through his wife originally when we were both teaching hot yoga, funny
Yes,
enough. Is that right?
absolutely. Yes, I
Yeah.
remember it.
Yeah, that's great. So, guys, I am so excited to have Marcel Hernandez on the show today. He, like I said, is a good old friend. But the thing that I think is the most intriguing for me is that at his ripe young age, and I'm going to call him young, I'm not going to dispel how old you are, but you are a young father and you have two beautiful small children with your wife. And you started in 2016 a nonprofit corporation called Be About Change. And specifically, Be About Change is helping improve success in our youth, in our community, through literacy and leadership programs and different opportunities within that for them. Even
Yes.
offering these programs outside of that, scholarships for the youth that you're assisting through the programs that you're offering. Your background personally includes struggle, I know. So I'm very, very, very honored that you came on the show today to be able to talk about your personal past and what it is that propelled you to start this foundation, this corporation rather, Be About Change, because it is doing some really, really monumentally beneficial things through the youth, through the community that is needed for literacy and leadership like you talk about. And I think those are a couple of things that have kind of gone by the wayside as our youth have developed. And when I say youth, I'm not talking like little, I'm talking teenagers, correct?
Yes, 12 to 18-year-olds.
Yeah, 12 to 18-year-old, that trajectory for a lot of our youth, depending upon the home that they come from and the upbringing that they have experienced, can be very traumatic. And so what Marcel's corporation is doing and the programming that he uses with the people that help him with this corporation is so foundational for these young men that it's something to behold. And I'm really, first of all, I'm proud of you for doing it. I think it's
Thank
amazing.
you.
Yeah, it's no small feat what you've undertaken, and you've done some really great things. So we're going to share a little bit more about that. And like I said, your personal past too, and how you got to that why for you, because I think that's really a valuable piece that makes you so relatable to not just the people that you're helping, but the people that are coming in to help you with your corporation, with your foundation. All right. Without further ado, Marcel Hernandez. Let's
Thank you,
go.
Don. And as I was thinking about meeting with you today, I was remembering our training sessions and how at the time, at that season of my training, I was really looking to learn more about ways to introduce circuits
Yeah.
and just a more a style of training that it involved the compound movements I was already doing, but
Okay.
in such a way that allowed me to kind of keep my heart rate elevated and focus on my form and that sort of thing. And one of the things that you helped me do at that time was to elevate my viewpoint of that type of training. And
Oh,
the reason why that kind of sticks in my mind is because that's really what we're doing in programming with Be About Change, is simply
mhm.
elevating viewpoints, because we know that it's all accessible by pretty much everyone. It's a matter of, can you see it in order to access it?
Oh, wow.
And as I was thinking about that, and also even with your podcast and what you were doing in interviewing folks and hearing stories and facilitating a platform that allows for relatability on
Mm.
a very human connection level. That is something that was kind of the uh, what's the word, the impetus or the motivation behind founding Be About Change.
Yeah.
Is at the end of 2015, I was writing for a local newspaper and writing stories about individuals making a difference in the community and really pursuing things intentionally. And one of my articles was rejected. It was probably October, November timeframe,
Okay.
and I was about a year into sobriety. And
Mm.
that at that time, it was just I don't know, it was kind of a culmination of different life events
Hmm.
that became stressful.
Hmm.
And being an artist, having an article rejected is like, oh, it's a personal insult, right?
Yes,
And
for
of course,
sure.
the
Yeah.
the all the immaturity that goes along with
Right.
taking it personal.
Right.
And so I decided, you know what? Let me just self-publish. And so the Be About Change name actually came from my friend Damien, a childhood friend of mine. I actually just spoke with him yesterday on the phone.
Oh,
He and I have known each other since fourth grade.
okay.
And I remember some years back when he was stationed nearby, we were hanging out and we were talking, and I was like, man, I really want to quit drinking. I really want to get sober.
Right.
And he's like, well, Marcel, don't just talk about change, be about change. He has kind of this drill sergeant background, and but one that commands respect and attention. And so
Yes.
that stuck with me. And so when I got to the point where I was self-publishing, I thought to myself, this ought to have a purpose of some sort beyond just me ranting.
Okay.
That's got a shelf life on it, right? In terms of attention
Always
spans. Uh,
understand.
but ultimately, we did start with scholarships, and our founding board was just my personal network of people that I know, doctors, attorneys, teachers, just individuals that some I had known for a long time, and some were more recent friends. And that's how we started, was higher education scholarships, because I had remembered when I was growing up in Dallas, an organization called University Outreach that
Hmm.
had similar programs. At the time, it was not just scholarships, but it was also enrichment on the
Hmm.
academic side, SAT prep, writing workshops, what's now known as STEM workshops, but at that time it was like just science and math,
Yeah.
and at local community colleges. And I remember the experience of going onto a college campus, and even though I didn't know it in seventh, eighth grade, the idea of going to college being kind of planted
Hmm.
as a possibility for the future. And of course, seventh, eighth grade, you're just kind of screwing around with your friends, right? But it's
Right.
like the experience of being around caring adults and
Ah,
what that means long term is really kind of what sticks with you, even though I didn't necessarily realize it till 20 years later.
sure. Sure. That's a big
And
piece.
for sure, and so that was something that that stayed with me and has remained in the back of my mind when it comes to, it's not, well, for speaking for myself, when I first started the organization, it was in youth we are very idealistic,
Right.
and that, so my motivation was more along those lines. And as I have gained more experience in the program side of Be About Change, I realized within the first year
Okay.
that it was actually me that was receiving the education from young people.
Oh,
And
wow.
that's not
Yeah.
so obvious when you first start, right? You're like, oh, I'm going to help this person and this person because I'm
Yeah.
so important, right?
Yeah.
Just there's a level of unconscious ego that kind of leads,
Right.
until you get smacked in the face a few times with just the reality of, it's not about me. It's not about one individual, but
Mhm.
it's about the ideally the collective energy that we can harness together to to it's Lent, so that we can carry the cross up the hill, right?
Yes. Yeah.
Because for sure we will fall. and
Yes.
and and how can we build a community that helps us stand back up and keep moving forward, even though we know the inevitable, right?
Right. Right.
Um,
What an interesting awareness for you to have. And I think probably most foundations come out of that. I want to help. I want to do. I want to give. I want to all this stuff. And the receiving part of it is something that we just really don't go into thinking about it. I'm doing this for that. So you're doing it for different reasons, but the gift that it gives you back is so amazing.
Yeah, and to extend that point a little bit, perhaps also unconscious was
Mhm.
my being a year into sobriety. You and I met when I was probably at what I would call like the tail end of my career in drinking and using,
Mhm.
and so that would have been, I don't know, maybe 12, 13, 14, and I got sober in October of 2014,
Yeah.
and then I think our training sessions were after that because I think we had very meaningful discussions about training, nutrition, spirituality,
Right.
trauma, like all these different things that might lead most people into recovery, right?
Right.
Um, and the I guess the thing that came from that was the realization that I would need to eventually give myself a place to be to how can I say this? Um, be about change enabled me to be my ideal self,
Okay.
and then project that externally.
Mm.
And so in a very real way, it was my quest for redemption
Mhm.
from my prior life,
Yeah.
let's call it, and perhaps that's what allowed me to realize the gift that I was receiving from that.
Yes. Yeah. When you get clear, when you become very, very aware, no matter what the addiction is,
Hmm.
I think there's a nice opening that you experience when you get through the weeds, so to speak, and you
Hmm.
get on the other side of that mire that you're working through, and you can start to see little pieces of light that go, okay, this is what that means. This is what that is. That was my experience. It sounds like that was part of your experience as well.
For sure. I like how you say little pieces of light. I have a mentor, Father Mark Beckman, who you may know the name,
I do. Yeah.
who says, I've heard him say it in homilies and also just in conversation, allowing the light of the Lord to shine through us like a stained glass window.
Mhm.
Ooh, and that, it hits me just saying it out loud. Um, because it's really what it is, right? We know that we are all broken, and maybe philosophically some might disagree, right? But
Yeah.
it's the image of a stained glass window, seeing the broken glass and seeing the light shining through it. So when somebody says that, that's obviously the image that comes to mind,
Yeah.
but it makes perfect sense,
Mhm.
and it's why it's to me such a timeless image.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. It's beautiful. And being broken is not it, it's not a forever situation. Like we're all broken, but piecing ourselves back together in those ways makes life affordable, makes life manageable, makes our traumas look different. We
Hmm.
can experience things. It's not that things, and I'm quick to say, like, it's not that stuff didn't happen. It's not that stuff we didn't have those experiences that may have contributed to our trauma. And like you probably talk to your participants about this too. It's not about things that didn't, like let's erase the stuff that happened to you that kind of broke us into those pieces, but it's about being aware of what that has done to us and how that's fragmented us, and now what we can actualize, what we can choose to do to bring ourselves to a place of stability and love and nurturing and self-acceptance, and understanding that we have full choice to move forward in this path or move forward in this path. And experiencing the support around you is something I think that is, um, gosh, that just helps so, so, so very much. And that's what you're doing with Be About Change, which I think is one of the most brilliant things. It's support, and
Hmm.
it's giving in that capacity to let them know that A, they're capable, and B, I'm gonna stand here with you. I'm gonna help you through this.
For sure. And that's the I don't know, unfortunate, but that's the interesting thing about being young is that when we can have all the supports in the world, and as kids, we just we take it for granted, right? It's like I know everything, and leave me alone. I'm gonna do it my way. What do you know? That sort of thing. And I've been on both sides of that,
Me
and,
too.
and even our young boys are like mini teenagers. It's like
Oh,
I see it coming already, right?
yeah.
And thankfully I've been there already as well.
Yeah.
But the gosh, it's I don't know what it is that primes the human mind to then realize, 10, 20 years later what a gift that really was
Mm,
in the past.
yeah.
But it's part of the work that we all do, is that knowing that, we may not live to see the direction that the tree grows in, so to speak.
Yeah.
But we do our best to water it nonetheless.
Yeah, yeah.
And
Oh, I love that. That's a great analogy. And I think I love what you say about it, because I think that invokes a lot of self-reflection. Like, what is it that really um brings that on? That understanding and that awareness? Is it our experience? Is it the things that have happened to us? Is it the people that have stepped in? Or is it a culmination of all things? And we can't really put our finger on defining one thing that makes it, that makes it what it is, so to speak. But I would stand to guess that for you, a lot of this is experience related for you. And first of all, knowing that you came from a pretty generationally sound backboard of family that were really great about supporting you and uplifting you and giving you a pretty stable foundation. Um, so for me, I think that's such a great gift for you to pass on to somebody, but it's not withstanding no trauma because you had a dip. We talk about your addiction and we talk about kind of where
Mhm.
life went. So I guess my point is, no one is without the possibility of having dips, no matter where you come from.
True, and yes, I think our culture is just by nature. We we look at different socioeconomic classes as we label them in certain ways, right?
Absolutely.
And and interestingly enough, I've seen some very, very unhappy people that are very affluent,
Hmm.
and I've seen some people who have very few means have the most gracious hearts.
Right.
And so I don't know that the stereotypes that we have, or that we talk about, or that we even believe personally, are always true.
Yeah.
It's more just the appearance of them, right?
Yeah.
Um, and in fact, like I was talking with a friend recently about how part of Be About Change programming is to cultivate long-term thinking.
Okay.
And our conversation quickly went to, it's hard enough with any teenager to think long term,
Right.
regardless of where they are socioeconomically.
Right.
And and so I think the a difference working with youth in poverty is, of course, the concentration of traumas that
Mm-hmm.
that appear or that manifest environmentally,
Yeah.
at the household level, systemically even.
Hmm.
And it's not, my personal opinion is that often manifests racially.
Okay.
I think the core is socioeconomic,
Okay.
um, and we get sidetracked on the racial component. And
Yes.
I don't think it's a conspiracy. I just think it's part of our nature, right?
Yeah.
And and so I have to be careful to both validate the perspective
Hmm.
and challenge it,
Right.
because I wrestle with that internally myself.
Yeah.
And I feel that, we talk about trauma. We know oftentimes that, as children, we don't have any control over the traumas that we experience.
Right.
And I can't say there's a certain age that, I mean, the law thinks there's a certain age, right? But I don't know that we kind of crossed the threshold that you mentioned, that
Mhm.
says, I am now
We are.
100% culpable or accountable for
Yeah.
this
Yeah.
because of everything that we're carrying, right?
Right.
And so the things that we carry are not a reason for our actions so much as they are influences.
Yeah.
Um, and I think that what we see in poverty oftentimes, um, even if we were just to quantify them with your basic income,
Mhm.
access, those sorts of things,
Mhm.
there's going to be a stronger um I don't what's the word I'm looking for. There it's just it's simple to say it's more difficult, but it's not that simple. It's just I guess what we talked about before we started was the viewpoint,
Yes. Yeah.
because it's I have come to believe that it's not an access issue when it comes to resources so much as it is a willingness issue. And
Okay.
even me saying that will piss people off.
Yeah.
But you can't be willing to do something if you don't know that it exists. And
Perfect. Yeah.
so,
Yeah.
like again, like our training sessions, you showing me, I remember there was a deadlift curl that you showed me that I was like, this sucks, right? But now I know that I can access something differently.
Yeah.
Whereas I would not have known that
Hmm.
were it not for that session, right?
Hmm.
Um, and so I think it's a matter of, oftentimes in our programming, we'll have this kind of exercise where I was like, all right, imagine a 6 foot fence, and this whole thing is a maze, right? But now stand on top of this chair and you can look beyond the fence and you can kind of envision your pathway through the maze.
Yeah.
Whereas you might not be able to do that if you were at eye level.
Right.
And so that's what I think it is more than anything else. So it's willingness, but with the qualifier of being able to see a decision or an action.
Yeah. And it's showing them that they have the ability to look into a different perspective, to have a different perspective.
Yeah, it's almost like again, some people look at it as it's designed specifically for this purpose, and maybe it is,
Mm.
um, but it's more like it's environmental, right? So I don't know that I couldn't I wouldn't have known that I could go to college had I not been on the college campus, you know.
Yes. It's
Um,
giving that experience for them to then have something relatable. I get it. Yeah. So
and
that they can then expand their perspective and expand their view.
right.
Mhm.
And even I remember, as we're talking, my dad would take me to SMU basketball games,
Mhm.
and even that gets sentimental for me.
Mm. Yeah.
Because, like, when I'm growing up, it's a father and a son just having fun going to a basketball game,
Right.
and I realized what my father was doing for me
Mhm.
by immersing me in that environment. And so that's what kind of leads me to do the same with our boys, is having had that experience and knowing that it's almost unconscious in a good way, right? Like, hey, this is just a natural thing for me to do because my dad did that with me.
Mhm.
And then from programming, knowing that not every young person is afforded that,
Right.
and those opportunities and those experiences. And and it's ideally a way to bring in community members, community partners to facilitate these experiences. Because when I if you imagine like the bridge over the Cumberland,
Mhm.
and imagine it has like two supports, right? And of course the symbolism is that each support is a parent.
Right.
And if one of those supports is missing, well, the bridge is unstable. It's still
Mm.
being held up, but
Yeah.
it's unstable. And
Mhm.
so, as community members, we are the I think it's called the superstructure over the bridge, that holds it up and that kind of allows it to continue, from one side to the other.
Yeah.
And if there's a weak superstructure, meaning a weak community support system, then it's still wobbly or
Right.
still
Still
unstable,
unstable. Mhm.
and it will never be stable enough to replace that other pillar.
Mhm.
Um, but the more community members and supports there are, the more stability there is.
Yeah.
And
I
and
love that
really,
visual, Marcel. That's perfect. That explains so much about what it is that Be About Change is trying to do and instill and to move towards.
yeah, and I think maybe that could also be since we're on symbolism,
Yeah.
it could
Yeah.
also be that I forget what word you used at the beginning, but for males, it's like around age 27, when we finally mature a little bit more. But perhaps that walk across the bridge is the ability to go from youth um, to the willingness to seek redemption, or right.
Yeah. willingness to be aware, maybe
Right. Yeah.
to really,
Redemption. Yeah. It's a very personal thing, right? But
yeah,
yeah, to be aware,
yeah,
to observe the self.
yeah.
Right.
What a beautiful gift that your dad gave you. And I know you got emotional talking about it because it just, it's so meaningful though to hear you speak about that and to know that your organization is doing that. That is the desire and that is the direction that you're trying to go to help other kids have that same type of experience, that same feeling, that same empathy and understanding so that one day it something will click for them and it gives them another way to look at life when they may not have had an opportunity to look at life from a broader perspective.
Yeah. And I guess as you describe it that way, I realized that, my grandpa did things for his children, for my dad and his brother and sister, when they were growing up. And so really, like even you and I talking right now is an accumulation of thousands of years of lineage in
Yeah,
this one moment.
yeah, yeah.
And so the ability to codify that in a program is meaningful because you're really taking the power that has come from tens of thousands of years ago,
Hmm.
into this moment.
Yeah. How do you quantify that? Those experiences, tens of thousands of years ago, all those experiences down and condense it into a program. What are some of the key points that Be About Change accentuates in terms of the things that you're doing for the community? What are your offerings? What are the things that you've seen be the most valuable, maybe for the youth that you're helping?
Yep. So I'll qualify that a little bit. So when we didn't transition, but we added like writing workshops into programming
Mhm.
within 2016 and started at high schools. And then my same friend who came up with the phrase or who imparted the phrase "be about change" with me, suggested we go down to the juvenile court.
Mhm.
And he says, "Hey, I know you like teaching classes. You ought to go check out the court," because of some positive experiences that he had when he was growing up. And so I did, and great team down at the juvenile court, and a lot of good, lasting relationships from that. And so we started doing monthly workshops there,
Okay.
and initially they started as writing workshops because I have found writing to be a great tool to just externalize the shit that's in here in
Yeah.
a way that is active.
Yes.
Um, and then from there, I know Brent Coleman.
Yeah.
So he joined our board and he designed the physical training side of the program.
Mhm.
And of course, I met him through Lindsay also. And I just have always appreciated his sense of humor, his teaching style, the way he engages with classes.
Yeah.
And so he graciously accepted, and we focused on body weight training
Mhm.
because of how, with just training in general, as you know, whether you're doing, uh, quantity and volume of push-ups or distance in running or time in running, it's
Yeah.
all things that you can kind of segment out and have a kind of a stair-stepped goal structure.
Mhm.
And so it's just a great analogy for life. Like it's
Yes.
something like, hey, um, I know that I've been truant and I've missed, 100 days of school.
Mhm.
So how can I get back on track? Well, the answer is always going to be one day at a time, like sobriety.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and so if you're struggling running and you want to get to a mile, well, you're going to start with, a tenth of a mile
Right.
and say, hey, let me just go run continuously for a tenth of a mile. I'll do that for a week or two, but I'm going to add another tenth. And so it's the cumulative effect of
Mhm.
your efforts where you can then look back and say, oh, I see how far I have come, literally in running, and then
Yes.
also in whatever effort it is that you're attacking.
Yes.
And so that's part of the element that we integrated into the programming,
Mhm.
because it's, again, when you're young, you're not necessarily directly conscious of that,
Yeah.
but it's the experience of having done it. And ideally, the fact that Brent is introducing different things conceptually that
Mhm.
a young person can then take with them and use 10, 20 years from now, when they hit a wall in, in a hardship or life difficulty or a relationship problem or a conflict or whatever it is.
Right.
um, like to this day, for me personally, when I get either really anxious or angry, burpees are always accessible.
Yeah.
And I have learned that pranayama, right? Like, or
Yeah.
prana, the
That
process
breath.
of
Hmm.
being aware of my breath
Hmm.
and intentionally shortening it, um, just tremendously helps me. Um,
Hmm.
in some ways, like not in measurable ways,
Yeah.
but I know that I'll say this: if you are having a bad attitude in any given day or moment, like do 50 to 100 burpees straight, and then tell me that you still have a bad attitude.
Right. Right.
It's
I did that the other day actually. I was kind of in a funk and I was in my stuff and I was having to dig out some of my tools from the past and
Mhm.
one of those tools is physical movement. And
Yes.
I know that for me, that gift of being able to look at the effort that I've put forth, it's like
Hmm.
cutting the grass. It's like this instant gratification of going, look what I just did. I know that cutting the grass, that sounds kind of crazy, but it's
I've been
looking,
there.
yeah,
Yep.
but it's looking back and it's giving yourself a sense of empowerment that okay, I'm going to get out of my way. First of all, I'm going to know that I can do this because I've worked to do this and I'm going to know that this is benefiting me because it's something that I instilled a long time ago and it's a
Hmm.
foundational piece for me to kind of get out of the shit, if you will.
Hmm.
Yeah, I know a lot of people will do that. Go for a walk, go for a run. um 100 burpees, I'm going to just tell you, Marcel, that's going to be a lot for me.
Oh,
But
it's like running. It's a cadence thing. So I think that my breath gets more. I get more fatigued in my lungs first than my muscles. And
ah,
so I have to be aware of that and then use it like a jog,
yeah,
like almost rhythmic breathing,
I get that. Yeah.
um, with burpees at least.
Yeah.
Just because, obviously you can control the pace.
Mhm.
Um, but so in the process of introducing this programming, and just my relationships with the court, I learned a lot of uh, trends and patterns,
Mhm.
in criminal justice, in behavior, in
Yes.
Nashville specifically, and just I think Nashville is just a sample of the rest of the United States.
Right, right.
Um, and so in Tennessee, for example, for uh, the adult recidivism rate is about 50%. And of course,
Okay.
it fluctuates year to year.
Mhm.
But of those adults that are incarcerated, a significant percentage did not graduate high school.
Ah,
So there's a correlation. It's not like directly related, right? But there's a relationship between education and criminal justice.
sure.
And so as we zoom in on the 12 to 18-year-old age group, you see a lot of interactions with the juvenile court. And then
Mhm.
as you zoom in further or further back, I should say, on say middle school, you start to see truancy, skipping school. And
Uh-huh.
then if you trace it all the way back to first, second, third grade, you see reading and math as the academic factors that influence the others.
Yeah.
Now, we know from a justice standpoint that it's a constellation of factors. It's not just like one or two things,
Right.
but like all the things we talked about environmentally, the household, the academics, the peer groups, the ACEs, like all these different things, right?
Yes.
Um, but that is ultimately what led me into literacy, and just a very um, um, providential, I guess, experience that I had with a nun named Sister Sandra Smithson,
Mhm.
a co-founder of Smithson Craighead Academy. And I met her when she was terminally ill in 22, like maybe March timeframe. And I met her for the first time then, and she just changed my life in 2 hours. My first conversation with her, she was probably like 96,
Oh,
and that's when I was introduced, at least more meaningfully, into literacy
mhm.
and literacy teaching styles.
Yeah.
And so that's what led me to pursue a program called Reading Success, of which Be About Change is a service provider, which
Okay.
is geared for kindergarten and first grade.
Oh, that's great, Marcel. Yeah, I didn't know that. That's great.
And so part of that, it's a very specific like sequential blended phonics program
Mhm.
that allows for um, I forgive me if I don't know the educational or scientific terms, but it allows for um, the way you and I learned how to say the word bat is like b and then a and t.
Uh-huh.
But even though we know that, with phonics, but even though we know that we don't pronounce it but at,
Uh-huh.
it's the combination of the consonant and the vowel that isn't necessarily obvious to all learners.
Okay.
And that led me to then meet with literacy coaches and other study academics and even some podcasts that talk about some of the more controversial curriculums.
Yeah.
But my my one of the things that I've kept in the back of my mind is the third grade retention law here in the state of
Mm.
Tennessee.
Mhm.
And it, of course, it's politically divisive. But I have learned through both Be About Change and just personal experience that I, I guess the best way to put it is that I am not the one that is qualified to work in the policy area,
Okay.
so much so as I need to focus on this
Sure.
and what I can impact in my area, in my circle, and,
Absolutely.
and hence leaning into programming. And so it's like I may not agree with the elements of the third grade retention law, um, but to me, if there is a if there's a 10-foot wall, then I know that I need to navigate with getting over 10 feet.
Mhm.
I'm not going to sit there and have feelings about the fact that there's a 10-foot wall
Yeah.
because that's not going to help me navigate through it or over it. And
Yeah.
so I am more of a navigator. It's like the 10-foot wall is just like information about how to navigate.
Right. Right. That makes sense.
And so that's how I look at the political things. Like, other people can get caught up in the his fault, her fault, all that stuff.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
it's just, to me, it's like, I'm gonna die someday. It's like I'm gonna be on my deathbed worried about whose fault this thing is, right?
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah. Do
it's
you
not
find in
logical
the
to me.
program, like when you have participants that come in, um, first of all, are they pretty willing to look at that kind of thing and drop the any kind of fault finding or dive into what it might take for them to have a different perspective or to be the change that they need to be for themselves? Or do you feel like they come in and they're pretty yeah, let's do it.
So with the justice involved youth, of course, nobody wants to be forced to participate in anything.
Yeah, that's true.
Um, however, I have found a counter narrative to what our society, how our society describes young people.
Okay.
And, I could point to maybe a few different reasons as to why, but I think by and large, that of the participants that come to our program and stick with it, if they aren't willing at the onset, they become willing in the process.
Mhm.
And not just that, but the ideas and thoughts and concepts that they articulate are much more advanced and higher level in thinking than
Yes.
the stereotype portrays.
Yeah. And
And
you're trying to, kind of open them up to that, to an expanded viewpoint for themselves, an expanded awareness of themselves that maybe they've been boxed in for their life.
yeah, so I mean, there have been times when we have facilitated discussions on race, um, violence in
Mhm.
society, even at in local level.
Yeah.
And what's been really interesting for me is how I think, like my generation, Gen X,
Yeah.
we, huh, the, as I'm thinking about the way to say this, I'm thinking about like how much of it is my personal opinion versus like just a reality, right? And
Understand.
who knows? The listener can decide that.
Right.
Um, but I feel like as Gen X,
Yeah.
so we saw Columbine as teenagers in early 20s.
Mhm.
Um, we saw Rodney King.
Mhm.
We saw these like just kind of pivotal societal events
Yeah.
that, for better or worse, I will say that I believe we allowed to define us, and
Yes.
unnecessarily so. Like, in other words, we said, this is who I am, instead of saying, like, this is what life is and this is how I will approach it.
Yeah.
And as those events continue to happen, then I think that we continue to focus on them because they confirmed that initial. I mean, we always knew that these things were there, but they
Mm-hmm.
weren't in our face as they were then, per se,
Mm-hmm.
at the national level, right? Um, and so I think that a lot of what we have done as a generation is almost project the way that we approach the reconciliation of those events into our young people, and part
Okay.
of that is stereotyping. And
Yes.
so we say that, like, I believe that my generation has gone a little too far into validation.
Right. Right.
Um, and I'm not saying validation is a bad thing. Like,
Yeah.
obviously it's a great thing. I hear you. I honor what you're saying. I honor your perspective, right? Um, but I think when we stay in validation, that we do not facilitate the self-actualization, or the
Yes.
elevation of viewpoint,
Yeah. We're in
because
danger of not looking outside of ourselves for other possibilities for the scenarios and the situations that are happening.
we almost perpetuate. It's almost like it's almost as if to say, I experienced this when I was coming of age, and therefore you should also use it as your identity. um
Yeah. Oh, wow.
and
That's real, man. That's big.
and
That's
'cause I got together with a group of guys, and we did an event for, I think it was like student, every student, every voice heard, every student heard. It's just like a district wide event.
mhm.
And the guys we're all kind of about the same age. And I made a joke, and some laughed, and so I think some agreed, and some may have not have agreed. But I made the joke that SEL, social emotional learning,
Mhm.
is really just the codification of Gen X's hardships into a curriculum.
Yeah.
And I'm very sarcastic, right? So, like,
Okay.
I mean, you know my sense of humor,
Yeah.
and I it is important as much as it is amusing.
Yeah.
It's simply because even as an individual, I have a thought that because I am a certain way, other people must also be that way, and that's just not true.
Well, and I think that that's kind of the kickback. That's what you're speaking of, is that we limit ourselves on accepting other circumstances, other situations as something bigger and something different
Hmm.
by putting that plug on it, and it's just instinctual almost. Like, if I break it down to the very, very smallest thing, like I'm having a disagreement with my husband, and I'm speaking X and he's speaking Y, and
Right,
we're both wanting the other one to think and be what our letter is
for sure.
instinctually. So I understand what you're saying. It's almost like an inbred kind of thing that has happened through the culmination of the experiences in the world that we've all lived through. I think it's how do you have quite frank discussions? Because I know you said it earlier, like you dance on that kind of on that line of validation
Mm.
and experience, if you will. But how do you have those frank conversations with these young men that may not be open to coming outside of that box? May That's all they've known, and this is, damn it, this is all I'm going to think because this is what I believe, and this is and it is their belief.
So I'm trying to kind of quantify, like, if I can,
Mhm.
percentages of the, if it's a binary discussion, like, I have a narrative in my head about who I am, and I'm going to perpetuate that, versus I am forward moving, and I know that these events are going to happen, and but I'm going to keep moving, right?
Okay.
Um, and I gotta say that in my experience, the the narrative that is either presented by an adult on the validation side, or comes from the young person, um, does not always seem to be the prevailing narrative when it comes to the younger groups.
Okay.
Meaning that I suspect, probably in large part because of social media and our access to the world,
Mhm.
that our young people have a much more global view than
Okay.
what I had growing up. Now there are good and bad parts to that, right?
Yeah,
So,
as to everything, yeah. Okay, that's intriguing.
and this even manifests in discussion politically.
Mhm.
So the let's just call it the urban solution to violence that involves firearms is always, or is often, I should say, um, one of restriction
Yeah,
and just banning and that sort of thing.
right.
And so that's like, the left argument. And the
Right.
right argument is, self-protection, pro Second Amendment, like all these things.
Mhm.
And when those discussions come up with young people, in my experience, seem to be able to see and understand both sides of the argument,
Yeah.
and are not quick to adopt what adults are seemingly imposing
Wow. Okay.
politically, which I
Okay.
really love,
Yeah.
because I love independent thought, period.
Yeah.
Even if you're disagreeing with me, right? Now,
Yeah, yeah.
now,
It's
if we're
important.
working toward a solution, like, it's one thing, and we're disagreeing just because we're being disagreeable, that's like
Mhm.
worthless. But if you're challenging a viewpoint or an ideology, good for you.
Yeah.
Like,
Yeah.
regardless of what side you're on,
Right.
because that is what will, at least from a like a group of people, like a society standpoint, in my opinion, you need both sides to have the better outcome.
Right.
um, so long as you don't, again, get sidetracked on whose fault it is, right? Because that's
Yes, and it goes
a
back into
waste of time.
that. Mhm. Yeah.
Which you see obviously at, like, at the political level, at policy making level, all of that.
Yeah.
But young people are very much. I think when we're young, we know that we must be accountable. We just, we're young and stupid, and so we
Mm.
choose not to be, or
Yeah.
because it's not fun or it's not cool, right?
Yeah,
And
yeah. All the
and so
above.
it's trying to it's trying um, to honor the foolishness of youth,
Mhm.
while also showing that, some of these decisions are permanent.
Mm,
and
mhm.
and so let's facilitate an environment that allows for exploration of how to navigate through these things.
Yes.
And accountability is a young people are conscious of what it means to be accountable.
Right.
It's just that the narratives that we see in the news are like the the extreme cases, right? Where
Yes.
we are not being accountable.
Right.
Um, and I see similar things, similar counter narratives with young people when it comes to race.
Mhm.
Um, it, I remember like actual workshops that we've had that dealt with race and violence, and the let's just call it again the narrative that adults give,
Right.
and then the fact that a very small portion of young people actually agreed with that narrative, which is it's just cool to me, because it's like
Yeah.
it's rebellion, but it's also um rebellion and challenging, but it's also like, no, just because it defines you doesn't mean it defines me.
Well, it
And
shows a piece of independent thought. I think that you had said earlier, independent
yes,
thinking. And that's powerful, but it's also it brings a lot of hope for me when I hear you say that.
yes, 100%.
That's
And
a lot of hope.
I will say, and this is one that's more theoretical, because I haven't found a like a reliable data set.
Mhm.
But one thing that I took note of in programming, I was with a national nonprofit for about a year and a half, and that was very intense. Going into neighborhoods, meeting with families, meeting, in communities, and having just very, um, I would say, difficult interactions with youth and families.
Mm.
um, like with probation officers or at detention facilities, that sort of thing. And the one thing that was common, I would say, if not 100%, right at 100%, was the use of social media. Now,
Ah,
I'm stating the obvious, right?
yeah,
Now, I'm not saying that social media is a cause, but it's almost like an enabler.
I get that. Hmm.
And what the interesting part to me is that if you take a young person in a inner city school, like a teenager, and just a typical, you take 10 people, right? Just a very small sample, and you look at their news feeds on Instagram, um, they are often going to be um, uh, property crimes, um, even violent crimes.
Right.
And as because I was interested in this, I saw this almost as a global phenomenon.
Hmm.
And this is what I mean by inner city kids, like lower socioeconomic
Hmm.
end of the spectrum.
Hmm.
And you contrast that with, I don't have data to support this, but I'm supposing, right? Let's just say you have an affluent community, and you look at the housewives, and you look at their news feeds on
Yeah.
social media and Instagram.
Yeah.
I'd bet my savings account that they're not full of property crimes and violent crime,
Mm-hmm.
right? They're full of, I don't know, I'm going to guess here, like, um, you know, the the trendiest style, or the restaurant or what have you, right?
Right.
I have
Right.
no idea, right? But it ain't the
Right.
violent crime.
Right.
Um, that's just interesting to me, because what that means to me is that social media then is just an extension of the environment.
Mm.
Um, and we already know from a programming standpoint that environment is the ultimate variable that we cannot control.
Right.
Um, and so I look at my youth, and it's like, if I wanted to get into trouble, I would call a friend, be like, let's go do this. Or
Yeah.
I'd see him out on the street, let's go do this, right?
Yeah.
Whereas like now, you can just the street comes to you on your
It's so
phone,
different.
and then location, all of that.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
And so I think the at least the perception is that the problems that we had as children have been compounded because of this enabling of these platforms.
Yeah.
And again, I'm not saying like the platform is at fault, but it's almost just like you're like greasing the path, right?
Yeah, it's really interesting. That's a very, very, very valid point that you bring up. And I would be really, really interested to see research on that, if someone do a study on it. And maybe it's been done and we haven't seen it yet. But I think that that makes complete sense to me for what you're saying. Absolutely. Let me ask you on that environment situation, and kind of on that, in that vein, if you will, the people that come into your program that you effect in a really positive way, how do you teach them to go back into that environment and continue to exist in something that may not be as productive for them, to keep those protocol, if you will, and the tools that
Right.
you've given them useful? How, what is the, if you talk about retention, what is the retention for what it is that Be About Change is doing for that, for that demographic and for the people that you're helping?
So I will say first and foremost that the perfect program does not exist.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I I think that I am coming to the conclusion that I haven't fully come to it, but it's a thought that I have, is that to an extent the program does not matter
Okay.
so much as the quality of the relationships that the program facilitates.
Ah, I love it. I love it.
Um, so
Relationships, connectability.
mhm. Like
Mhm.
I like two that come to mind to me that are very good at uh at at the relational aspect are YMCA,
Mhm.
YCAP, and backfield in motion. And I know some people in both personally, and I'm talking here in Middle Tennessee.
Yeah.
Um, I know some people in both personally, and I've been involved with YCAP. I haven't really been involved with backfield in motion, but I know some of their volunteers and graduates.
Yeah.
And YCAP, I just know that from being formerly on a board of what was called Latino Achievers before they restructured, the systems that are in place are very strong.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I cite those two is because for me they're reminiscent of university outreach from when I was a kid, because
Okay.
they offer a parallel track all through a student's career in school. And again, it's that superstructure, right?
Yeah.
And the
Yeah.
fortification of it.
Yeah.
And so I know you asked me about Be About Change program, but a part of my answer involves other programs and what I'm learning and what have learned from them.
Yes.
Um, because the way that Be About Change programming is evolving is and has been for a few years is number one, parent and family engagement,
Okay.
which is probably more important than the youth engagement. Um, and also the program itself, we are creating it such that a young person can experience the future now. What I mean
Mhm.
by that is we're designing it so that a young person can have a stake of equity in either a business or just some sort of investment where they
Yeah.
can experience what it's like to get a return so that they know they are introduced personally to the concept of delayed gratification.
Yeah.
Because why would I go buy a pair of Jordans when I can put that money away systematically and be a millionaire? Like
Yeah.
it's illogical to buy that pair of Jordans, but we don't know that if we're not experiencing it.
Right.
And I think that part of that also involves a meaningful introduction to a career path,
Mm-hmm.
because for most people, your vehicle for investment is your income.
Yes.
And and then I guess trace it back a little bit, and it's more about strengths finding. Like, what am I interested in?
Yeah.
Am I interested in, you know, a particular trade? Am I interested in becoming a surgeon, or like, what is it?
Yeah.
And then ideally aligning that young person with that. Now, that's not to say that again that is the magic bullet, right? Because it's like one thing I see our older son is he's naturally gifted in music, and so psychologically he will play a song and he'd be like, okay, I'm done practicing. I'm like, no, you're not done practicing. And even yesterday, like, as a pianist and organist myself, like, he sees me practice,
Uh-huh.
and I'm like, how I practice this one section like 20 times at least, and you see me do that. I was like, do you
Yeah.
think I do that for fun? It's like,
Yeah.
no. It's like, okay. So I think my mistake is I try to use logic with them, right?
Okay.
But I'll say, look, I know you know the song. If you practiced it 10 more times, would you know it better or worse? And
Right.
he's like, "Ah, better." I'm like, then go practice, right?
Right.
But I think it's the repetition of that again, like with exercise.
Mm-hmm. It's muscle
That
memory.
yes, that
Mm-hmm.
that primes our brain
Mm-hmm.
to then pursue that. And so the same thing with a career path or a strength or an interest. And it's almost a talented person that's at a disadvantage because
I agree
it's
with that.
a it's a it's a it's like a misconception.
Yeah.
Like you think I'm good, and the next thing you know, you're getting passed by the guy that's outworking you, who may
Yeah.
not be as good, but
Yeah.
he's destroying it because he's up at 4 or 5 a.m.
Mm-hmm.
doing things that he doesn't like to do.
You drop the mic, Marcel. Yeah. There you go. Absolutely. I think I love that analogy and I love that description. I think that so many times we get caught up in those comfortable things that we think that come easier to us. And for lack of better terms, the people that come through your program may be in a comfort zone of this is my experience, this is what I am, this is my label, this is where I'm going to be. Yeah, they haven't been exposed to another line of thought that there's more possibility. And you've talked a lot about like what the magic bullet is, and there really isn't one magic thing. I think it's the culmination of all those experiences. And I think that's the cool thing about what your program is doing is you are open to exploring all those different outcomes and all those different circumstances that go into feeding that individual to feed their brain so that they can maybe open up another side of it and go, okay, I can see a possibility for myself outside of this point that I'm comfortable with and that I'm used to and that I do well, whether that's something good well or something negative well, if that makes sense.
Yes. Yeah. Everything that you're just describing, it is pattern recognition.
Mhm.
And maybe the theme for our discussion is the initial thing you introduced about, having the awareness to want to change.
Yeah.
Um, so it's like I think the first step is like pattern recognition, and then interrupting the pattern or,
Oh,
or the loop
yes.
or whatever it is. And that is, in my experience, is by far the most difficult to do with family members, more
Yeah.
so than youth participants. Um,
Oh,
because I'll just continue to use my generation as an example. There's a certain element of shame generationally that we have for like our inability to, pursue therapy, or to
yeah.
that we're out of shape, or that we, all these different kind of cultural identity things that we allowed to become part of our identity that really aren't.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and then we unconsciously want our children to experience the same hardship for no other reason that maybe we weren't validated, right? Maybe that's why we're heavy in validation.
Yeah.
Um, but
Wow.
but
Yes.
it, it's difficult. Gosh, it's difficult to. Uh, my mom calls it like you need to have a Goodwill Hunting moment. Like it's kind of cheesy in her characterization of things, but
Right.
um, and we're in the South too, right? So you can't be too direct with somebody; they get offended. Um,
Right. You have to be very, very conscious about what it is that you're saying, how you're saying it.
right.
Yeah,
We
I'm right there with
invite
you.
people instead of assign them, right?
Yeah.
Um, the I guess what it is that my some of my best mentors always challenge me to change within myself the things that I'm seeking relationally,
Okay.
and even like more so as I've gotten older and become a father and all these things. That's like I remember, gosh, a moment that I'm not proud of as a parent. I was angry with our older son, and he was making fun of his little brother.
Mhm.
And I said, "Well, you can't even rebound, because we're in basketball right now."
Uh-huh.
And as soon as I said it, I'm like, "What an asshole for me to say that
Oh,
like that, right?"
yeah.
And
Just a
I had this moment of realization at probably 11:30 at night, and I went and I woke him up, and I said, "Hey, I made fun of you, and I'm sorry because
yeah.
your inability to rebound is 100% on me. And so I will teach you how to rebound, right?" And it's it was a moment for me because number one, like I don't like admitting, you know, my own foolishness.
Well, I don't
Um,
know very many people that do. I just gonna say.
but with my children, it is an opportunity because I
Mhm,
know that in doing that, that at least ideally, I
mhm.
am positioning them to own their shit when they mess up, you
Yeah.
know, because they will, right?
Well, you're also interrupting your pattern.
Right.
I love that. Yeah. I love it. Interrupt the pattern. And everything that you're saying, I think, is so relatable on so many levels from a really larger piece. And I think anyone listening to this can pull so many beautiful little tidbits out of this conversation. Um, and the fact that what you're speaking of and how you're speaking about it just tells me that this organization that you started is really, really something of your heart, something of your total soul that is so meaningful on so many levels for you. And in that meaning is is change. In that meaning is where change is effected. Because when we live from that space and that center of meaningful for us and doing something that is so aligned with um, either challenging us or fulfilling us or uh, giving us bigger awareness, it feeds into our process in a really beautiful way. You're doing such a great job. I'm for it not to sound condescending, I'm really proud of you, Marcel.
Thank you, Don. I
Yeah.
One of my friends recently posted the pain that he experiences when he sees members of our community, children or young, teenagers killing each other,
Mhm.
and how it's triggering for him
Yeah.
because it reminds him of his loss at that age. And I remember there was one weekend and we were in Dallas and we were playing across the street at the elementary school. Me and like two or three other friends. We were in the fourth or fifth grade, and one of my friends had, he'd walked up to our little group. We were kicking the soccer ball or something, whatever we were doing, and he's like, "Hey, so and so just got shot. They just killed him." And I remember that kid. He was 13,
Mm.
and he lived. I remember the intersection where he lived, but that kid lived at this particular intersection, and somebody, knocked on the door. He opened it, and they just shot him in the face and killed him.
Mm.
And my friend was, in tears, like the guy who delivered the news. And that was kind of my first personal experience with knowing somebody that had gotten killed.
Mhm.
And then some years later, when I was in high school, that same friend who delivered the news was shot and killed in his house
Mm.
in September of that year. It was either a sophomore or junior in high school, and my girlfriend at the time delivered the news. And she told me on a Saturday, we had a Saturday football game. I was in band, I was a band nerd, and she was on the drill team, and so we would just all hang out before catching the bus to the field or whatever. And she told me, "Hey, they shot him," and then I just remember kind of going into this swirl of emotions. My dad was out of town. My mom comforted me,
Mhm.
and I played at the funeral and like this whole thing. I remember it very vividly. The funeral,
Right.
like grabbing the handful of dirt, putting it on his casket, playing Amazing Grace at the funeral, the rain on the way to the cemetery, like all these little details, right?
Right.
And so that stuck with me. And then I had another friend killed when I was 21 or 22. This would have been 2001 or 2002. Another friend from kindergarten, and they had recently come out to Arizona when I was there for a time to do a recording project, to do a song, and and so that hit me hard too, right? It's just like this seeming barrage of violence and loss, and I allowed that to consume me and just kind of
Mm.
further push me into addiction. Like that was my excuse, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I was already in it. It's just like, oh, here's another reason.
Yeah.
Um, And so that always has remained in the back of my mind is like, when you're young, you're like, oh, I could have saved him, or I could have done something different, or I should have been there for him, or I should have done this or that. And as you get older, you're like, I had no control over that. Like I'm
Yeah.
not God, right?
Yeah.
And so in a very unconscious way, Be About Change came about from my effort to make an impact in the past, but in the here and now.
Yes.
And then connecting with other people who experience, like my friend that just made that post, who have had similar experiences, that I think when you look around hard enough, you find a lot of commonality in those shared um, negative experiences.
Right.
And then some of us deal with it with addiction, some of us deal with it being an asshole to other people, and
Mhm.
just however ways, or all of the above.
Right.
And And I think the comment I made to him was something to the effect of like, we're not afforded the luxury of allowing our scabs to become scars. Like it's almost like um, it's not, well, at least for me, it's not necessarily a bad thing. But it's almost like you keep the wound present um, for relatability with younger people.
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Do you know, I used to tell clients that you're writing a book. So think about your life. Each year of your life would be quote a chapter. And so say you're 33 years old, you're writing chapter number 33. and you had those experiences, maybe like you're talking about chapter number 12, chapter number 7, you can go back, you can highlight those, you can underline them, you can dog ear the pages, you can do all those things and relive those and understand those. But moving forward, you can't have the same experience again. So, what will you do with those experiences and with that understanding in that book that you've written? It's a part of you, but how can you honor that part of you and be, like you said, relatable to other people who have been in similar situations so that it can help them see a bigger picture without sending yourself into an addictive phase or an addictive space to deal with that and just replaying that emotional trauma from that experience in chapter 7 or chapter 12. And I don't know that we get to that. Again, I love that magic bullet. I don't think there's a magic bullet to say, oh, this is when I've graduated from
Right.
this is when I've graduated from my trauma, or this is when I've graduated from my experience. But I think we continue to have those experiences, but the relatability on a broader scale is what I think is so beautiful about your Be About Change organization. And when you speak about it, I love it because it's not a demanding kind of demonstrative explanation about it. It's a very matter of fact, and it gives people an option. So, for if nothing else today, I want you to hear that I hear what it is that you're saying on such a deeper level, and I hope that other people can hear that with your words too, because it's we all have options and we all have choice. And there is no judgment one way nor the other about what it is. It is just what it is. And that relatability is what ties us together to help us all ultimately become the best versions of ourselves, to be about the changes that we need to make to make ourselves more whole in the long run.
Yeah, it's the seasons that we're in, and some seasons are, we go inside and we isolate and we maybe even recharge, and then other seasons we're out and we feel great and we interact with others, and it's the environment or the conditions or the climate lends itself to our openness.
Yeah.
Um, you are every time you say something, it triggers more thoughts, right?
Oh gosh.
You were you were you were talking about the entanglement of trauma with revisiting a chapter.
Mhm.
And when I was with the national nonprofit some years back, I had an opportunity to work with a university that were interested in utilizing EMDR
Yeah.
with some of our participants. And of course, we went through the channels of getting permission and all this, but before they were like not trying to convince me, but like saying, "Hey, are you open to doing this?"
Yeah.
And I said, "I'm open to it, but I only know about it conceptually. I've never experienced EMDR." And so, like this wonderful lady that I met, lifelong friend now, she's like, "Well, if you want to, I'll come and we can do EMDR." I'm like, "All
Okay.
right, cool. How can I talk about it if I haven't experienced it?"
Okay.
And so we did some sessions and we talked about some traumatic memories, or not talked about, but like, facilitated the remembering of the
Yeah.
traumatic memories.
Brought it to the surface, if you will.
Yes.
Yeah.
And then she used that light bar, where the light kind of oscillates and your eyes follow it. And what I know now is that, they cross your corpus callosum of your brain, and it kind of reconfigures, or I think it disentangles the emotion from the event.
Yeah.
Um, and unfortunately it's difficult to quantify, like, it affected my ability to disentangle it by X%.
Yeah.
um
There is no real quantification.
right.
Yeah.
But I've had the experience and I can talk about some of the traumatic events, without triggering myself. And so I
Yes.
know that there's value in that.
Yeah.
And it's meaningful for me to be able to, again, open back to that chapter that I've bookmarked, read a passage from it, the highlighted passage, and then offer it, and then the listener or the person can take from it what they want or leave it, right?
Mhm.
But then there's also the implied invitation to EMDR, because it's not traditional talk therapy. I think it is potentially more accessible, because young people don't want to necessarily talk about their issues, right? They're
That's
still
right.
trying to kind of figure them out. But I
Yes.
feel like EMDR provides an environment, and if done with a, just a compassionate, qualified facilitator or therapist,
Mhm.
that they can then access some of those memories to potentially disentangle the the emotion from it. Because I feel like the complementing emotion to the event is what causes us, it pushes us into the pattern behavior.
Yes.
And so the
Yes.
disentanglement of it opens us to the possibility of breaking that pattern.
Breaking the pattern. Yeah. Letting the pattern go. Have you seen EMDR in the Be About Change organization? Be
Not,
Yeah.
no. And so that was with a different organization, but yeah, I can, the way actually that I've presented it with young people, and maybe I'm giving myself away, but it's like, okay, whatever. Um, is that the way that I introduce it is I'll talk about it from my own perspective. I'll be like,
Mhm.
there was this one time where, I had this nice lady, she came out, she did this for me, and I will do it in front of a parent. Um, and and then more often than not, at least at the time, the young person will be like, "Oh, that sounds really interesting."
Mhm.
And then my response, like things that I've learned just from sales, is like, well, that might not be for you. Like, you may not want to do that.
Yeah.
And then they're like, no, no, I really want to, right? Just
Yeah.
basic psychology. Um, so that's kind of how I present it
Yeah.
is like, I did this over here, but you may not want to,
Yeah. Well, I mean, whatever works to help get
Mm,
them out of their own way. I think that's the biggest thing, and to get them out of their own way and to show them so powerfully how much they have access to within themselves.
right.
Yeah. Where do you see your organization going maybe in the next 5 to 10 years? What's your goals for it, and where do you look to be?
So I work now with an organization called Tucker's House, and we
Mhm.
do home modifications for families who have children with disabilities. And one thing that I have both participated in and witnessed is the difficulty in trying to codify what's in a founder's mind into a
Mhm.
process or into other team members. And so we have, some struggles have been more difficult than others, but we thankfully have a really strong team that is able to codify some of those
Mhm.
in ways that really, I think, position us for long-term sustainability and growth. And
Right.
so that's one thing that I've carried into Be About Change is being a founder myself, because I was able to witness it and relate to it.
Yes.
And
Both
so,
both
a-
sides. Yes.
and perhaps again, a theme from our discussion is getting out of my way, right? Getting out of my own way and realizing that in order for sustainability for Be About Change, I need to get out of the way.
Ah.
And so part of that is, and we in fact brought one of the team members from Tucker's House in to lead a core values session to help us really define more specifically what the core values are for Be About Change,
Mhm.
and ultimately how those core values can inform the direction, both in terms of board engagement as well as personnel recruitment and just ultimately long-term leadership team.
Yeah.
And so 5 to 10 years is going to have both a specific leadership team that is able to carry development and fundraising, programming, and operations, but also um, perhaps more specifically, a team centered on the delivery of the program itself.
Yes.
Again, and I suspect I met with a friend yesterday, kind of talking through some ideas. I suspect that that part of that will involve a more rigorous application process, which
Okay.
means that unfortunately we'll have to turn some people away.
I got you.
But the point being that the group that will be selected will be ones that are, at least in the short term that we interact with them, are demonstrating a commitment to the long term.
Yeah.
Because I like everything from recovery when it comes to the psychological component and the spiritual component, because it demands a constant redirection to me, to self. Like, what
Mhm.
am I doing? What can I do? And
Mhm.
so a lot of that is in program, just Jungian psychology in
Yeah.
general. And I think that's what will be that's what that's what we'll ask of participants, is
Yes.
to commit to the daily or the hourly process,
Yeah.
knowing that like in the short term, I might not see, you know, the strength gains,
Yeah.
but 6 months later, I can look back and see them and
Yeah.
have because I will have experienced and participated in them.
Right. Or I may not be able to read this particular passage with clarity and with the proper perspective, I guess is the word I'm looking for. But if I stick with it and I sit with it and I'm patient and I continually return to the self, then maybe 2 weeks from now I'll have a different outcome. So lots of different ways to affect the change within those people, those individuals. But I really love that returning to the self part, because whether you are in an active recovery state or whether you are one of the youth that goes through your program, it's always about returning to the self and returning to that base, if you will, and figuring out what that base is.
Yeah, and that's the beauty of the gift that's kind of within all of it is that the the experience of engaging with and facilitating the program side forces me to do the same with myself.
Oh yes,
Um,
I
and
get
and
that.
and of course the amazing outcome of that is the opportunity to become a better father.
Right.
Um,
Right.
and just all of that. Like as a parent, you're exhausted, right? Like
Right.
95% of the time. But nobody gives a shit, right? And
Yeah.
especially kids.
Yeah.
And so like we're called to, I guess when we're able to honor the fatigue,
Mhm.
but also to a certain extent ignore it, because I think like for me, my greatest goal and desire as a parent is to just simply lay a strong enough foundation within my children that when they go and do stupid shit, in the world,
Mhm.
that they know that they have a home here and here to return to,
Ah, it's beautiful. Yeah.
because I won't always be here.
Yeah.
And then
It's
for
kind of
then,
building it's almost like it's building self-reliance, but it's not but without the, isolation of it, if that makes sense.
yeah, it's not like I don't know. I've been Catholic my entire life, and there's like a certain element of religious and cultural guilt that goes along with that, right?
Sure.
For better or worse. And so it's not guilt, right? It's more the eternal flame of hope. Like
Yeah. It's hope.
keep it fueled, keep it burning, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. What has been your biggest blessing in starting the Be About Change organization?
The biggest. Um,
Maybe there's been more than one. Maybe
right.
there's been a handful of them.
Gosh, I would have to say probably a lot of what I just described, the way that it has propelled me into knowing that I can always realign myself, and that was not obvious to me at all when I
Yeah.
first started the organization. But so accepting my own faults, character defects, poor decisions, like all of that, and knowing that a there's always a way to stand back up.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
because as long as I keep standing up, my children will know that they can keep standing up.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I mean that's as personal as it gets for me.
Yeah. Yeah. Amen. 100%. Amen. Yeah. Man. Well, if you take all of that and that ball right there that you just explained, and you're listening to this today and you can hear exactly what it is that you're saying about your desire, your dedication as a human being to evolve and to live in that center and to be that oneness and that hope. Man, you're a gift. Yeah, you're doing great things. And it's far reaching. And maybe we'll have this conversation 10 years from now and we'll be able to say, "Oh my gosh, now I can look back at that talk that we had and be like, wow, I had no idea that this is where it would get. This is what it would impact. This is where it would be." But you're impacting lives in a really, really powerful way by just doing your life, if you will. So thank you
Thank
for
you.
that.
Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. So I know we ended super deep right there, but I want to kind of totally flip the switch on you
Sure.
and before I let you go anyway, go for some fun rapid fire questions, just so any individuals that are listening to this today or watching this can know that, man, you are a sarcastic, funny dude. And I love it. Right. There's all these fun sides to you, which I think is great, but you're human and what you bring to the table in terms of helping youth with the literacy and the leadership programs and everything that you are on the brink of uncovering within your organization and the things that you are getting ready to unveil. Because whether you know it or not, I'm just listening to this and I'm going, oh my gosh, he's going to do this. He's going to do this. He's going to do this. There's so much possibility there. And you're so open to that, which is just makes it all just flow. Aside from all of that, let's get a little lighthearted here.
All right.
All right. I got just a few questions for you. Are you ready?
Okay. Of course.
All right. Question number 1. What is your go-to pastime?
Oh gosh, music and exercise.
Okay. What's your favorite music right now? Because I know sometimes that probably changes for me season to season. What are you listening to now?
Listening to, yes, I always kind of my go-to is rap, hip hop.
Okay.
And let me qualify that actual rap, hip hop from 90s, early 2000s. Um, and Playing is more, I would say, church hymns because I
Mhm.
play church,
Yeah.
and I'm by no means a proficient or natural jazz player or artist, but I am interested in it, and so I
Okay.
will play some of that.
That's such a huge digression from one thing to the other.
Right.
I love it. I love it. Yes, relatable on all levels right there.
I'll add to that the boys are currently in a Rob Zombie phase,
What?
and we love it. So
That's amazing.
yeah,
You have every genre happening at your house.
for sure. And you know Lindsay, so I mean, it's all we're across
Yes,
the board.
it's perfect. All right, question number 2. What is your favorite store to shop at?
Oh God, online, 100%. I don't like going anywhere.
Oh,
I'm boring as it gets. Um,
I'm an Amazon junkie. I'm just going to go out there and say that one.
yeah, for sure. I cannot stand going. You know what? Post-pandemic, malls and places like that,
Yeah.
I feel anxious.
Okay.
So I just don't.
Online
Or
shopping it is.
yes.
Yeah, I'm with you. All right. Question number 3. What never fails to make you laugh?
So family,
Mhm.
just silliness and well, I say every now and then, fairly often, Lindsay will give some one-liners that just make me laugh. And I'll say this, and I'll say it publicly because she would probably be disappointed if I didn't. Like half the time. if I'm making a joke that's, that for others to see, some element of it came from her.
Okay.
She's just, in many ways, she's more quick-witted than I am. And
She is so quick-witted. That's one of my favorite things. And like, those people in your life that are just dead-faced when they say it and just it's just the delivery is just as funny as the
mhm.
line that's coming out.
She has she has the perfect combination tone of voice of Southern and Hood, uh, which will just, I love it. And of
You're
course,
right.
and the boys, like, so they're have us as parents,
Yeah.
and so they may or may not cuss from time to time.
Oh, well, same in our house. Yeah, I'm with you. I'm with you. All right, question number 4. What world record do you think that you have a shot at breaking?
That's an interesting question. Let's see.
I would want to say maybe something basketball related.
No, no way.
You don't think?
Um, no, maybe ability to talk for one long run-on sentence in a podcast interview. Um, let's go with that. And like everybody of Mexican descent, it has the propensity for incredibly long run-on sentences. So my
That's
cultural background plus you priming me for this podcast, you can go back and time it.
okay.
It's in there somewhere.
Okay. When I'm mastering this episode, I'll look for that for you.
You'd be like, I had to edit it out. It was so long.
No, no. My husband has some great Latino friends, and they would say the same thing as
Yeah,
would my husband about him.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's like one long stream of consciousness.
Yeah. It's just, I've got so much to say, and I just don't even want to break it up with punctuation because it's just that important. And I really want to get it all out right now.
Don, be grateful you don't live with me. Um,
I'll talk to Lindsay about that a little bit more on the side. Yeah. All right. Question number 5. Not quite as lighthearted, but a little more deep. But I want to know who your hero is. Who is your hero?
my mom and dad for sure.
Yeah.
Yeah, without question.
Yeah. Are you close with them? I mean, always have been close with them, right?
Yes. So I'm an only child, and
Mhm.
everybody can judge that as they will. Um, so both have always challenged me to be better in whatever season I am in life.
Yeah.
And at sometimes, like maybe in my late teens, early 20s, it was like my mom just praying for me a lot,
Mhm.
and knowing that I was just being an idiot. But by and large, my entire life, they have never allowed me to make excuses for either who I am or where I am or how I am.
Yeah.
Um, and even in marriage, like when we had difficulty there, my parents challenged me to just be better.
Yeah.
And so everything from being a little kid in sports and school on through now. I mean, again, jokingly, sometimes grandparents give unsolicited advice about how to be a parent, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
But sometimes it's bittersweet because my mom will actually say, or my dad will say, like share what they believe are mistakes that they made when I was a child, and
Interesting.
and I can learn from that,
Yeah.
because I can see their perspectives now as adults, or I mean, as adults, as older adults, or as grandparents,
Yeah.
um, that they are. I suspect that when a person becomes a grandparent, they can see their children, they can see themselves in their children as parents.
Right.
And there's probably some value to that when it comes to just life perspective. And their willingness to share that with me is very meaningful to me.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it sounds like those relationships are deep and foundationally sound and the honorable, honorable both ways.
They are.
Yeah.
Yep.
No. Well, Marcel, it has been awesome catching up with you today. I always love our talks and I love getting to connect with you and hearing what you have to say on a deeper level. I really do believe that your organization, Be About Change, is doing great things, affecting one life at a time along the way, and doing everything that you can. How can people get involved in your organization? How can people help? And what is it that you're needing to keep this foundation happening, thriving, and building and growing?
So right now we are growing our relationships with private donors and private foundations
Mhm.
on the fundraising side, and also in relationships, we are growing in individuals and companies that are in private equity, investment, career paths. So everything from your trades down to your professional career paths, and just individuals that are open to not just talking about those career paths, but also spending time in on the program side,
Yeah.
and perhaps even sharing a little life experience, similar to what we've talked about today. And like, hey, this is where I was as a young person. This is the path that I've walked. These are my missteps. These are how I got back on the path. These are
Yeah.
how I fell down and got back up. All of these different things. It's just really showing up in in a way that allows for meaningful conversation and listening and discussion and all these different things.
It's that authenticity.
For sure. My brain thought about that word. It seems cliche these days.
I know,
So
but it fits and it's appropriate and it makes sense. It's about
yes,
it's about being authentic,
it is.
and living from that place of authenticity. It's hard to do.
Yeah, it's just honesty of self, right?
Love it. Love it. Perfect. Another drop the mic. Honesty of self. There you go. Marcel, so good talking to you. Good to see you today.
Good to see you, Don. Thank you so much.
Oh, you are welcome. Everybody, check it out. Be About Change, Middle Tennessee. Reach out to Marcel or myself, get you in contact with the right people to get you lined up with this organization that is doing great things for our community of our youth. All right. Y'all have a great rest of your day, Marcel.
Take care.
Thanks so much for tuning in today, guys. If you have an idea for an interview or you would like to share your own story, I would love to hear from you. Send me a message at dawn@thesoulgoals.com. If you enjoyed today's podcast, I'd love for you to leave a review and to consider following and subscribing to the show. With weekly releases, there is always another interesting story to be heard. I do hope that today's guests and their words have helped to bring some extra light to your day and encouraged you to find a deeper space of your very own soul goals. Until next time, friends, remember that everyone has a story and every story matters.